on kind of thing. We don't talk about our emotions very well, Brits, do we? Kind of stuff. But we need to change because obviously it's creating a bad culture. If you want to create a good culture within work life, family life, society, if we want to change societal views of mental health, then we need to start talking openly about it. Stigma can make it incredibly difficult for someone who is suffering to approach and ask for help. If you talk openly, you're creating a culture that makes that a lot easier for somebody. When you're in distress or you're feeling unwell, that initial help, that initial step of asking someone for help is the hardest thing you can do. It's really, really difficult. So bear that in mind. Let's start talking about it. As managers as well, I'm not talking in a micromanagement type of way, record all sickness absences. Look for patterns that might indicate that someone's struggling. So odd days here and there, for example, that's a sign. So approach that person and ask, is everything all right? Is there anything I can help with? You're a manager, they will look to you to do that. It's your duty of care as well as managers to be looking out for the welfare of your team members. So bear that in mind as well. It may be the first action that you take is actually to increase your knowledge of mental health conditions. This is going to help you understand the range of signs and symptoms, but also how your behaviour as a manager can impact on other people. Another thing is recognising early intervention can really, really help somebody and a member of your team before it's gone so far down the line that they've become quite ill. So speak, put your hand up, check in on people, see how they're doing. It's really important. So that's it for managers. As individuals, it's exactly the same. It's about being proactive in the workplace and then contributing to that well-being culture at work. So it starts, and this is really important as individuals, start setting boundaries for yourself in terms of hours of work and how many hours you're doing. If you're regularly working 50 plus hours a week, then there's something wrong, okay? And you need to raise this with your manager. But to touch on that, as the days of clocking in and out are gone, aren't they? I hope so. Who still clocks in and out at work? Hand. One person. Can I ask you a question? Does your company have a well-being policy? No. It's interesting. Okay. Well, thankfully, the majority of the room didn't put their hand up. But manager, unless you have an Uber micromanager, because you are not clocking in, your manager has no idea 100% how many hours a week you're doing unless you tell them. And who honestly tells their manager how many hours they've done that week? Truthfully. So there you go. So they don't know. It's up to you to raise it as a problem. So bear that in mind. If it's regularly 50 hours a week, then you need to speak to your manager about it. Because it could be that they just need to employ, if they've got the resources to employ more people from the team to give you some more support, but you need to raise it. Because most of the time, we're all managers of businesses, most of the time we don't know 100% what's going on, we don't have crystal balls. So you need to speak to us about that as well. As a colleague, as well as colleagues, don't be afraid to ask somebody how they are. They might want to talk to you about it, they might not want to talk about it, but just that simple act that you've let them know that it's okay if they want to talk about it later down the line. That will help with, I mentioned the hardest thing that someone can do. That can really help somebody. They know that they've got someone they can go to. So you've reached out to them. As well, on the other side, if someone does come to you, try your hardest not to brush them away. Again, it's the hardest thing. And I know it's hard as well because we're all busy and it's never the right time. And when someone comes to you and you want to chat to you, it can make you feel quite uncomfortable because you never quite know what the right thing to say is and stuff like that as well. But see if you can make that time for them. If it's not the right time right now, see if you can take them for a coffee another day or go for one glass of wine after work. Not a bottle. See if you can do that. Sometimes the hardest thing as well for people to ask for help is how they'll be perceived by their colleagues. And this is coming out a lot from the research. It's how they think the managers and colleagues will perceive them in the workplace as either being a little bit flaky, not very good at their job. I've already said, again, it's the hardest step, so bear that in mind. Grown-up stuff now. Don't gossip about anybody at work who's been signed off for stress. Don't. Really don't do it, guys. You never know who may be listening. You never know who's picking up on that. We've already mentioned 1 in 3 event professionals will suffer at some point in their lives. That's, if you've got 3 or more people in your team, that's more than one person. Okay, and you never know, it can hit you at any time if you're not taking care and looking after yourself. Mental illness is really not that choosy. It doesn't care. So bear that in mind. Be mindful of those water cooler chats, is what I'm saying, because there's a couple of people that I'm talking to from the support kind of network with Event Well, and one of the big things that's coming out is that they've heard they don't want to ask for help. Particularly one lady that I'm talking to does not want to ask her manager for help because she's overheard her colleagues talking about somebody else who's off sick at the moment. So it's really important. So watch those photocopy and water cooler chats. Be kind, be nice to each other. And then just to finish off, last one, this is really important, talk to each other, talk to people. Talk to each other, be open, speak to someone, speak to a confidant at work, speak to your friends, speak to your family, whatever you need to do, but let's start creating cultures in this industry where it's okay to start talking about mental health. Okay, we all have pressured, stressful jobs in this industry. It's no different whether you're a planner, whether you're an agency, whether you're a supplier, whether you're a venue. We all feel those pressures and stresses. So let's change it where it doesn't have to be 1 in 3 that's going to suffer at some point in their careers. Let's see if we can make an impact on that. Let's see if we can make a difference. So that's it for me.
Amazing, thank you. Just by show of hands, who in the room is a manager? Great. Who in the room owns their own business? Who in the room owns their own business, works more than 50 hours a week, and that is a choice that they make? There is obviously, I mean, talking and creating culture is the biggest thing that I think we can take out of what Helen was saying, and that is true. If you do choose to work 50 hours a week, I mean, you're not going to get me to work less than 50 hours a week. It wouldn't happen. But I'm very self-aware of it. I sleep very well, I exercise very well, I eat very well. So it is about knowing your own boundaries and how far you can go, but doing it within what we were talking about earlier, your own wellness spectrum. So you have to understand yourself and how far you can push yourself and where you sit on your spectrum to be able to manage that. I just want to talk a little bit about language and about stress, because there is a huge difference between us in the office going, I am so stressed, to actually talking about stress that we can handle and stress we can deal with. There was a really nice analogy yesterday that was about being at the gym, and we can take weights and we can do so many weights with reps, and we can take a little bit of stress in our body and then we stop the rep and we go again and we stop, and we can handle that, and that makes us feel good. If we take a heavy weight and let's say we just squat with that heavy weight and then we have to stay there, we can't sustain that for very long, because that heavy weight eventually is going to push us to the ground. Shorter reps, lighter weight, good for us. As soon as we take a weight that's too heavy and we have to stay down, we can't push ourselves back up again. So there is a huge difference on the body and on our mental well-being between healthy stress, because none of us are in this job because we think it's easy, right? I mean, how many interviews do you go to and people go, do you know it's not 9 till 5? And you're going, are you fucking kidding me? We've taken on a really, really stressful job. So we know that we're taking that on. So Mark, do you want to tell us a little bit, what do you think is the difference between the healthy stress that we take on by being in events and what is too far?
Yeah, I think you touched on it really. Like, if as someone that owns their own business, to me, work is just a word for something that we do to fill time. Like, it's just another word to describe an activity. Okay, it means you get paid for it by definition, but if you enjoy what it is you're doing, then you're not going to be stressed doing it. So it's like the sleep thing. It's not necessarily about the number of hours. It's about what you're doing in those hours, the quality of those hours. And you touched on the whole culture thing, and I think it is about it. You can bang on about it all day, but it is about communication. As a manager, how are you supposed to know that your employees are suffering if they don't talk to you? And equally, as an employee, how are you supposed to get anything from your employees if you don't talk to them? And I think you'll be pleasantly surprised with the response you get. If you ever feel like you've got something difficult that you need to say, something that you think you might be perceived as being weak or not good enough at your job, I think you'll be pleasantly surprised by the response you get. No half-decent manager in their right mind is going to give you a negative response if you come to them for help. That just says a lot more about them than it does about you. So.
Absolutely. I think that the nicest thing that's come out of this week, which I've said everywhere, is I'm assuming none of you are looking at me and thinking, "Oh, she's had anorexia, she can't cope with life." And nobody else has either. Everyone's been like, cool, that's a thing about you that doesn't define you, but good to know, and I'm here if you need a hug, but otherwise, good. And that's sort of what we want to achieve. You know, we do have a really supportive industry full of people who will be there for you, but you do have to talk about it. I just want to touch on what you were saying about managers. I really hope that you all have managers that if you need to go and say this to, they will be really responsive and supportive. But equally, as managers, it is not your job to be scientifically aware or able to diagnose or handle anything. It is your job to make sure that your door is open, that they can speak to you. But just understand the difference between supporting your team and knowing when to push it through to a professional or when to take it one step further.
Absolutely, yeah.
Alex, same question to you. How do you feel about the difference between healthy stress and non-healthy stress?
Yeah, I think that what was coming up for me when you asked the question earlier was resilience. You know, we all have a level of resilience, and our resilience is based on lots of different factors. What you're saying about, you know, loving what you do, I think for me that's a huge factor. There's so many different things that go into it. You know, I think your resilience for dealing with stress, if you love what you're doing, is, and this is just off the top of my head, but it's got to be like 5 or 6 times higher than if you hate what you're doing. You know, I mean, it's just we've all experienced that simply, and I think that's quite an interesting mix. So I think the culture and look, there's always going to be a limit to how much is too much. If someone goes, hey, can you do this 1,000 person event yourself? Of course you can't. It's not possible. You know, that would be incredibly stressful. But if they kept saying, well, sorry, you're the only one, you're going to have to do it. So and there's no suppliers, you're just going to have to bring everything in. You know, you would just it would be terrible. It would be kind of bizarre. Of course, that would never happen. But as a kind of example of, there will always be a limit to how much.
But how many people in the room have the attitude that would go, yes, I fucking can. Yes, I can. Right, me too. You'd say, here's 1,000 person event, can you do it? I'd be like, watch out. But you take it on, don't you? And then actually, sometimes what you do is you take it on and then you realise that you've taken on too much stress. And do you think you can push back at that point when you've done that and you've realised that you're not coping?
This is a problem I have personally. I bite off more than I can chew a lot. I say yes to a lot of things at work and in my personal life. and then just never say no and just kind of let things crumble. Yeah. So this is quite personal for me, definitely. You know, and I think it's much better to not get to that point. You know, that's a lesson. That's a process I'm going through. Is being able to say no. And I think a lot of it is about asserting boundaries and having the confidence to assert your boundaries, whatever they might be. And there's a level of vulnerability in asserting your boundaries, because you're saying, that's too much for me. What you're asking is too much for me. And vulnerability scares us because it's considered weakness in our culture. It's not really. It's actually strength. It's a lot more brave to say, I can't do that, than it is to just pretend you can and just hope it goes away. That, for me, is not brave.
And if you're at A and B is the 1,000 person event, it's definitely okay to say, listen, I really want to be at B. I want to do B. I just need you to help me roadblock a little bit between here and there. And that really is when you should be saying to your manager, I want that stress. I want that pressure to do that project. But I know for sure I'm missing a couple of the steps that help me get there. And that way you can still push yourself to your boundaries, but you're not trying to take on something that you really can't handle and your stress can't cope with.